Welcome everybody to today's Day of Plans meeting, Thursday, December 12th, 10 a.m. I would like to quickly remind everybody to try to speak to the center of the table. That's where the recording devices are today. We will start out with a roll call.
Sure. Brian Fry is absent. Your next?
Here.
Cindy Miles?
Present.
Chuck Warren?
Here.
Bob Aldridge?
Here.
John McKay?
Here.
Joe Johnson?
Here.
All right, sir. I show 6 members are present.
That just sounded good. Now to go to item number 2, meeting summary approval for November 7th. Does anybody have any questions? Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And Justin, you are on, sir.
All right.
3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Justin Constantino with Advanced Plans here to talk about the first item of the day, daycare. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the purpose of this particular item today is to provide you with information, answer any questions that you may have. I know we discussed this at length at our last meeting in November, so answer some of those questions that were brought up then, and then ultimately make a recommendation to the full planning commission. Next slide, please. So the overview, again, I'll go over some definitions just as kind of a reminder of kind of how we got to where we are today, along with the current process, possible changes to the Unified Zoning Code, which you have those in your packets, as well as the recommended action. Next slide, please. So again, definitions, daycare, general, and daycare limited. And then I'll kind of go into what the home occupation component of that is, because that plays a significant role in those definitions. Next slide, please. So daycare general is a daycare center that provides care, protection, and supervision for more than 12 individuals at any one time, and it is not operated as a home occupation. That's really the big difference between daycare general and daycare limited, is that daycare general is more of a formal business venture that you would imagine, kind of in a commercial area, whereas daycare limited, let's go to the next slide, is specifically a home occupation with no more than 12 individuals. So this is typically what you would see in a residential home, in a residential neighborhood, potentially is a person that is running a daycare business as a home occupation. Let's go to the next slide, please. The definition of a home occupation is, to establish certain incidental and accessory home occupations, basically to ensure that the home occupations do not adversely affect the integrity of residential and rural areas. So again, more of a lower density operation takes place in the home, but the point of the home occupation, in this case daycare, is to make sure that it doesn't adversely affect the integrity of the area in which it is operating. Next slide, please. So the existing process currently requires a conditional use for the daycare general use. It is allowed as a conditional use in the single family, 2-family, rural residential, and other districts, B and GI. Next slide, please. Prior amendments back in earlier this year, we did tinker with the daycare limited portion We increased the maximum allowed children in the home occupation daycare in the Unified Zoning Code to match the maximum allowance by KDH. So it's more of a technical change, but I just want to go ahead and provide you some background as to the last time we touched this topic, which was earlier this year. Next slide, please. So possible changes, and this is what we're discussing today, possible changes to the Unified Zoning Code regarding daycare general specifically, is that it would be permitted in the single-family, two-family, manufactured residential housing through the establishment of an administrative permit process. And I'll go through that a little bit more on the next slide. So daycare general changes, basically what we would be doing, and these are the changes that we're proposing, is that we would allow the daycare general use in the SF5, SF10, TF3, and MH zoning districts through the requirement of an administrative permit or conditional use. The administrative permit would be a written notification stating the nature of the use, and we would also mail that notice to all property owners of land that abut and are contiguous to the application area. So basically what that looks like is someone would submit an application very similar to what we've done with short-term rentals, where somebody submits an application and then we would notify the surrounding property owners that somebody in your neighborhood adjacent to your property is interested in running a general daycare in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. That administrative permit, the application is subject to approval by the planning director. There is a 14-day protest period. So if we receive any protests during that 14-day period, basically if more than 50% of all of the owners of record of land, which abut and are contiguous to the application area, and more than 50% of them have a problem or issue or want to discuss this further, it would become a conditional use process. So again, very similar to the administrative permit review process that we're currently doing for short-term rentals. Here, we're just applying it to the daycare general use. Next slide, please. Here's kind of an example of what that would look like. This property here in yellow would be the property that is making an application for the daycare general use. All of these properties in blue, even those across the street, would be properties that would be receiving a notification. Let's go to the next slide, please. The individuals that will be receiving the notification are the owners of record for the property, so not the tenant. So whoever the owner is, they are the ones who are receiving the notification that there is a potential daycare general use happening next door. The next slide, please. Here's kind of another example of that. This one is specifically designed to show kind of the funkiness of a lot of how these properties are laid out. So as you can see, there's two properties here that are touching the main subject property. All of these properties in blue would be receiving a notification in this hypothetical scenario. Next slide, please. So this is some of the feedback that we had discussed at our last meeting on November 7th. I wanted to go ahead and kind of recap some of these items and address some of these questions. I know that one of the big discussions that we had was daycare regarding group home. There is a discussion about what the difference is between those two. Manufactured housing and mobile homes clarification, I'll go into that briefly. And then we also discussed kind of age limit. What would be the age of the individuals who are going to be taken care of temporarily in this daycare general use. So I'll go through each of these individually. Next slide, please. Again, this is just kind of to reiterate what the daycare general use is. No more than 12 individuals operated as a home occupation. I've gone through this definition before, so this is just the daycare general use. This is what we're specifically referencing today. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a group home definition. So completely different use in the Unified Zoning Code. No more than 10 persons, including 8 or fewer persons with a disability, need not be related by blood or marriage, and not to exceed 2 staff residents. Group home also includes state licensed home plus adult care facilities. So really, it's 2 separate uses. Group home typically deals with more adults or individuals that may require some sort of medical assistance, whereas daycare general use specifically deals with young people age 16 or younger. So that's really the big difference there is I know there was some discussion about, well, what happens if, there's older people there, or if they're staying overnight. And the daycare general use, that would not be a situation. They're age 16 years or younger, and they would not be staying overnight. So I just wanted to go ahead and clarify that.
Question.
Yes.
Why did you pick 16?
16 was actually based off of Kansas state statute.
Okay, it's under 16.
Under 16. Thank you, JR. Clarify, under 16. My apologies.
Okay, Justin, again, I've been involved in a lot of daycare conversations or childcare conversations in this community in the last couple of years. So when you say don't stay overnight, there's got to be an exception for when you have people that are working third shift and childcare providers for people who are working third shift, and those young people are in fact spending the night.
Yeah, I don't believe that the use would cover that.
Can you go to the definition, the slide
Sure.
of the definition?
One back, please. Thanks. Yeah, so this would be, the definition doesn't cover overnight, I think.
And I think it's a misnomer because it says daycare as opposed to child care. Because daycare can mean any of a number of things, where child care is caring for children.
Okay,
So,
there is a definition. It's in the staff report, and I'm sorry we don't have it on the slide, but it says daycare is defined in the Unified Zoning Code as an establishment that provides care, protection, and supervision for individuals on a regular basis away from their primary residence for less than 24 hours a day.
Okay,
So that way it can be a nighttime daycare, which I mean, this is kind of nice because it'd be a home-like setting.
right.
They can provide the child care, but they do not be there.
The time clock would start when you drop the individual off and pick them back up.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's individual, child or adult. I don't know that we have many adult daycares, but technically there could be adult.
We do have adult daycares.
That we see.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not-
Well,
I'm
yeah,
sure we won't
but they exist out there.
those.
More in the future.
Yep, we will.
any other questions about daycare versus food? Let's go to the next slide, please. Next one, please. Manufactured housing and mobile homes. I know that this kind of came up at our last meeting. There was some discussion about what a manufactured home is. There's a definition here. It's a structure consisting of one or more mobile components manufactured to the standards embodied in the Federal Manufactured Home Construction and Safety Standards Act. Really what it is that the units shall provide all the accommodations necessary to be a dwelling unit and shall be connected to all utilities in conformance with applicable regulations. The MH zoning district, which is the manufactured housing zoning district, the daycare general use would be allowed in the MH zoning district. That is not a change. That's currently allowed now. So I just wanted to go ahead and clarify that as a conditional use, it's allowed in the SF5, SF10, and then it's also allowed in the MH zoning district. Yeah.
And so MH zoning general, I mean, there has to be a limit. It's more than 12, but you could have 100. I mean, isn't there some
Yeah, what's the limit?
guideline there? I mean, how
Manufactured home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be the same as any other Commissioner Nix. The state would regulate that. They will actually inspect and determine the amount of occupancy that they're allowed. And that the size of the dwelling
the sizes?
will determine that.
Because we have one coming up today that's, could be 100, I suppose. It's a school,
Yeah,
a vacant school.
but my understanding, same as JR's, is that size is a
Is the-
primary
is what
factor. They also
okay.
look at, emergency egress and whatnot,
Safety of the children.
a variety of different things on that checklist.
But in the definition, doesn't the manufactured home have to have a permanent foundation?
No, not necessarily. If it's an RDM, residential design manufactured home, it would, but if it's in a park, it won't because parks aren't allowed to. If it's on a single lot, yes, it
That's
is.
a basic difference.
Interesting.
Next slide, please. Age limitation, again, this is that Kansas state statute that I was referencing earlier, child care facility definition. A facility maintained by a person who has control or custody of one or more children under the age of 16. So I just wanted to go ahead and go back to that age discussion, which we had previously and just kind of show that definition there and let you know what the age limitation would be when talking about daycares. Next slide, please. So revised updates. So what you have in your packet, those proposed UZC changes, the only addition that we have, the additional language, is that age limitation. So JR was kind enough to work on this for us. He added this section regarding the age limitations that the daycare general is permitted by administrative permit approval. Only the care of children as specified by that Kansas state statute as amended is permitted. So that hopefully addresses that age concern that we were discussing back in November. Any questions about the additional language? Next slide, please. So again, review process. This is where we currently are. I know that it's a little off because Wichita City Council has initiated this process since our last meeting, but we are currently at MAPC advanced plans. If you were to recommend approval on this particular item, it would go to the MAPC, and then we would be looking at final approval from the City Council and Board of County Commissioners on this. Any questions? Next slide. Again, here is the recommended action, which is to review these draft changes and recommend that the daycare general use in residential zoning districts be recommended to approval.
And before staff is done, I'd like to add to it also that we've heard from the Child Care Advocacy or Coalition group, and they were going to have a representative here today, but unfortunately they ended up having a schedule conflict. And so what they've indicated is they'd like to see it if you're willing to move forward with it. I'm sure they'd be fine with that, but they also offered that they could be at your January meeting to help provide any additional insights or context for this one.
If we want them just coming to our normal meeting, if we approve this, to move it forward.
Yeah.
And I'd make that motion.
And I would second that motion.
Before we get to the motion, I just want to clarify to make sure there wasn't anything additional clarifications that because of the board needed. Is everything been answered? You're good with all the responses, Commissioner Warren?
I've got one question, and I'm sure this has been answered, and I just have forgotten the answer to it. Doing a business in a residential neighborhood, this doesn't affect any rules that are under the homeowners association. We don't deal with that. If they got a homeowners association saying no businesses, we don't deal with that at all. They just have to do that on a separate issue.
That's correct. That is correct.
Yeah, they would have their own control over that. Okay, if there's no further comments, we have a motion in a second to recommend that this move on to the full body MAPC. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes at 6-0, is that right? Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda, item number 4, event centers in the county. The recommended action on this is that the changes to Unified Zoning Code and or comprehensive plan for the full MAPC to consider. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. Thank you all. Justin Constantino again. Next slide, please. Again, the purpose of this particular item is to provide you with some information. Again, answer some questions that we have discussed over the last few meetings, and then ultimately make a recommendation to the MAPC. Next slide, please. I will discuss the background of this item, kind of how this came about, why we're discussing it today, possible changes. Again, I'll go over the feedback that we have received both from the Board of County Commissioners, but then addressing your feedback as well, and then a draft review and update process. Next slide, please. Background on this, next slide. So again, this kind of came from the Board of County Commissioners. They tasked the planning department to address this particular item. There were some changes to the Unified Zoning Code back in 2016, which allowed for more than 20 acres by right to allow for event centers in the county. Less than 20 acres would be a conditional use. Since 2016, we have had multiple complaints, and this is what kind of prompted this issue. This is why the Board of County Commissioners had tasked the planning department to start looking for some answers on this particular case. is for noise, trash, traffic dust, temporary signs. There was a lot of ruckus out there on the weekends, especially when there wasn't necessarily an opportunity to patrol these, and a lot of the burden ultimately fell on the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office to patrol these particular event centers. October 2023, we had a BOCC staff meeting to discuss that. And then in December of 2023, that's kind of when we started kicking off this topic and started formally doing some research on it. Next slide, please. Definitions in the Unified Zoning Code. Event center in the county, premises that are frequently rented out for public or private activities, that are not repeated on a weekly basis, and that are not open to the public on a daily basis at times other than when an event is scheduled. So that's what that is specifically that we're dealing with today. Next slide, please. Existing regulations said they are currently permitted in the LC, GC, LI, and GI districts. They are permitted in the rural residential zoning district if the property is greater than 20 acres and is in compliance with the applicable conditions listed in the Unified Zoning Code. If the property in the rural residential zoning district is less than 20 acres, a conditional use is required. That is existing on the books today. Next slide, please. Parking, we do have parking and lighting regulations. These are in the zoning code. Parking needs to be on site, one space per 4 occupants. ADA parking needs to be hard surfaced. Lighting needs to be down, and there is a height limitation on the lighting as well. Next slide, please. All of those existing regulations can be found here. This is just kind of a snapshot from the Unified Zoning Code. Again, they are permitted by right on sites of 20 acres or greater. Next slide, please. Other communities, next slide. We did look at best practices in other communities. We reached out to several different communities within Kansas to kind of see what their guidelines were, any kind of regulations that they had. Next slide. Basically what we found was that the majority of them, 60%, did not have any kind of regulations in place. They were evaluating their event centers on a case-by-case basis. Whereas 20%, they currently have specific regulations for event centers, while the other 20% were doing the same thing that we're doing now, looking at researching ways to potentially regulate these event centers. Next slide, please. There was an article in or a paper done by the American Planning Association that mirrored a lot of the same issues that we were having at the county level here in Sedgwick County: traffic, drunk driving, noise, lights. Basically, this was kind of reassuring to see that not only is this something that we're dealing with in Sedgwick County, but it's something that a lot of these counties are dealing with on a national level as well. Next slide, please. Possible changes. Next slide. So again, what we are discussing today is potential changes both in the Unified Zoning Code and in the Comprehensive Plan, and then potential discussion regarding what a permitting process would look like going forward. And I'll kind of address each of these individually on the next slides. Zoning, this is what we have kind of in front of you today in your packet. Next slide, please. Here is the potential changes. You may remember that originally, when we first brought this to you a couple months ago, we mentioned that the owner must have a minimum 40 acres of contiguous property, not necessarily all one parcel. Based on the discussions that we ended up having over the last several months, it seemed like this group was a little bit more comfortable with the owner must have a minimum of 20 acres of contiguous property. Again, that's feedback that we got from the 11-7 Advanced Plans Committee meeting. Next slide, please. Lots of changes regarding zoning. This has not changed since our last meeting, but I wanted to go ahead and just remind you all that the process would be a conditional use for rural residential properties, and then by right in the LC, GC, LI, and GI zoning districts. A site plan would be required for by right and conditional use applications by the applicant when they were submitting their application. Next slide, please. Original setbacks, again, this is something that was originally proposed when we first kind of kickstarted this issue, was 200-foot minimum setback from the property line, 300 feet from existing residential dwellings that were not on the subject site, based on the feedback that we received from this group back on November 7th, it was to basically increase those setbacks, 400 feet minimum setback from the property line and 600 feet from the existing residential dwelling. So those changes are reflected in the Unified Zoning Code changes in your packet, but I just wanted to go ahead and make that distinction that since November and the feedback that we've received, those are the changes that you'll see in your packet this afternoon. Next slide, please. Here's kind of an example of that. This is where we started. So this is the 200 feet setback area. This right here is the 300 foot from a nearest residential dwelling unit. So this is just kind of a visual to show you where we started. Next slide, please. This would be the updated, what this group has proposed. Again, reducing it from 40 acres to 20 acres. But as far as setbacks go, this is a good example of what that would look like of where the event center can actually be constructed.
Is that the scale?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah, type in nod. Yes.
Next time. Next slide, please. Possible changes. Again, this is currently in your zoning code now. Maximum number of guests, no more than, or these are proposed to no more than 299 unless permitted by Sedgwick County through another process. Hours of operation, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 9 a.m. to midnight. Next slide, please. Screening, I know this kind of came up at our agenda review meeting, generally not required unless determined by the MAPC or governing body. So screening is something that we would discuss when an application officially comes into the MAPC. That would be part of your discussions and your discretion. Site plan required for by right and conditional use. So whenever if an application is required, then they would submit that site plan. Next slide, please. Possible changes to the comprehensive plan. So currently the comprehensive plan does not address this particular topic. What we found is that because event centers in the county have become so prevalent, it would be in our benefit to include this language in the comprehensive plan. So rural event centers, this is the language that we would be adding into the comprehensive plan as part of your recommendation, is that rural event centers for public or private activities are discouraged near residential subdivisions and or sensitive land uses and should have restrictions that mitigate nuisance or hazard impacts on surrounding properties such as noise, light, dust, parking, trash, and debris. Again, the comprehensive plan, more general in scope, whereas the Unified Zoning Code is the proposed regulations. So that's kind of the distinction between the two, is that Unified Zoning Code changes are what they should do. Comprehensive plan is basically addressing those on a grander scale, but making sure that we're addressing those as we develop into the future. Next slide, please. Possible changes regarding permitting process. We discussed this at the county level, got some good feedback. Any kind of permitting changes, that would be separate from the Unified Zoning Code. So we wouldn't be approving any kind of permitting changes today or recommending any changes today. It would specifically be zoning code and comprehensive plan. But the applicability, what this could potentially look like is a temporary permit for private events. Event centers in the county, the above zoning occupancy limit. So basically, this is kind of a work in process, the permitting portion of it, but today we would be discussing both changes to the UZC and comp plan. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Moving on to the next slide. Feedback. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so basically this is going back to September from the Board of County Commissioners. We presented these changes to them, the previous changes. The feedback we received is that we're generally going in the right direction. The Board of County Commissioners indicated that this is continuing to be a problem. They would like to see it addressed. Importance of a possible permit process. There was some discussion about some of these businesses having to register as a business. and discussion about how to measure noise. That's been a constant topic of conversation, and I'll kind of address that in just a little bit. Next slide, please. We're going back to the VOCC again on 1015, specifically dealing with noise. Sheriff Easter was in attendance on this, and there was significant discussion regarding noise and decibel level. We did discuss increased setback distance from existing dwelling units. I think this group has kind of addressed that. Interior noise mitigation, there was an exploration of decibel level enforcement and a need to specify that doors be closed for indoor events potentially. There was concern about, sure, it's indoors, but the doors are open and we're raging until midnight. Is that really indoors if the doors are open? Let's go to the next slide, please. This is feedback that we received from this group at our last meeting on November 7th. Again, reducing the minimum property size to 40 acres to 20 acres. Doubling the setbacks, again, that has been addressed in the language today. Let's go to the next slide, please. Again, we discussed financial impact to the applicant if we go from 20 to 40 acres. That was a big concern. So I'll go ahead and address that and provide a little example of what that would look like, the difference in cost to the applicants. County regulations being more restrictive than city regulations, that was a general concern amongst this group, as well as screening requirements. I know I touched upon that, but I'll touch upon it again briefly, and then I'll go into amplification, decibel limit concerns. One item that is actually not on this particular page, and the gentlemen from the appraiser's office are in attendance to potentially address, is we had some significant discussion on what the property would be categorized and the tax implications on the property. Should there be an event center on the property? I know that Kelly Dixon from MABCD was here last month and kind of spoke on that. And most of what Kelly had to say was correct, but it does get a little nuanced. I will do my best to give you the Cliff Notes version. But basically, we talked about percentages, and if the property has a certain percentage of use that is an event center, that percentage would be taxed as commercial, I believe. So for example, if there's a property and it's 100% of the property and 5% of it was being used as an event center, then it would be taxed at the 5% rate for a commercial use, whereas the other 95% would be residential or agricultural. And then the only exception to that, and this is something that Kelly did not dive into, is if the property is deemed agro-tourism. So basically, there is an exemption to that percentage process if they are classified as agro-tourism. So they're able to not have to split that out if that's the case. Yes, sir.
So in essence, you don't have to have a structure to be classified as an event center. You could have, say, for example, you have winery out there, and you have tents, and you're doing wine tastings and everything else. That could be classified as an event center. So you would have to be looking at that, on what your tax base would wind up being. So you don't necessarily have to have a physical, structure there, just how you're utilizing that particular amount of property.
I believe that is correct, yes. Yes. Do you gentlemen want to chime in or add any additional clarification?
Well,
I know there was a little bit more to the story.
There's a lot more to the story. Introduction, I'm Ronald Tidwell. I'm the Chief Deputy Appraiser for Sedgwick County. Wineries by themselves are agricultural properties. Because they hold an event 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 times a year for wine tasting stuff does not change the primary use of the property. The only time that we would classify it as a commercial was if there was an actual structure on the property that was being rented out for weddings or bar mitzvahs or any other type of event.
Receiving revenue from it.
But it would still be classified as agricultural building, which still carries the same assessment rate as a commercial building. Both agricultural buildings are classified as agricultural. They have an assessment rate of 25% of market value. Commercial buildings are assessed at 25% of market value. So The only caveat I'll throw in for agritourism is if you have an event center out in the county and they are registered as an agritourism business with the Department of Commerce, all of the land will be classified as agricultural use value, not market value, but use value. The building would be classified as agricultural use, but that will still carry the same assessment rate as commercial. And there is a big disparity between use value and market value.
Yeah.
Wait it all right.
You can go there.
Show up a co-rec stocking this year.
Well, and
That's a requirement of the state. That's nothing that we have to control.
I guess so we have a facility that has a lodge out in the county that also has events. Or we have a retreat center that also has events or some sort of a camp. What's the zoning look like on that? Does that fall underneath this? Does it fall under hotel motel? What? And that crosses over with this short-term rental as well. And, so I'm just trying to get clarification and really understand how you decide which is which.
Yeah, so the zoning on the property would remain constant. So one would
Right.
get zoning from the Unified Zoning Code, the other is tax classification.
Sure.
So the zoning on the property, it would come down to whether or not event centers are allowed in that particular zone.
If it's an event center, and I think that's the question.
Well, really, that's what I'm trying to clarify. I mean, because if it's primary use, and the reason I ask this, because we're seeing more and more people who have event centers, but they also have cabins. And I'm just using it as an example. Let's say somebody built a lodge, but as part of that, they host events, and maybe the event is a family reunion, maybe the event is a wedding reception or a wedding. So, it's really being used for multiple things.
So it makes a difference as to exactly what it's being used for. If you build a lodge, you have a family wedding, it's not an event center. If you build the same lodge and you put it on essentially the open market, so I can come hold an event there,
Yes.
then you're an event center. If you build cabins as well, and I can rent them to stay in overnight for my guests, then it would technically be short-term rental. That's what it would be. So there are nuances, but it depends exactly on what it's being used for. If it's purely private, purely family.
Well, sure, I get that.
Not.
Because I have a friend that has a place like that that's, they're not open to the public. But I'm more questioning, those that are open to the public.
Yeah, they're probably business.
And I think for the purpose of this, the feedback that we've gotten from the board of county commissioners is they're getting calls from members of the public who are saying, hey, the stereo and the speaker system
Yes.
is going late
Yes.
into the night, or there's trash that's left on the roadway.
Yes.
And these are commercial ventures where money is being exchanged.
Yes.
And for the most part, there's one in particular that's maybe an issue, but outside of that, but money's being exchanged and people are renting these things and these parties are happening.
Yep.
So what's the best fit for the county when it comes to these?
Right.
All good on the tax discussion.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you guys so much for being here. That said it way more eloquently than I would be able to. I'll go ahead and address these other items on the next slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. Financial impact example for a conditional use application, and this was kind of an example of what the cost difference would be if it was a 20 acre versus 40 acres. So for a non-residential use, if someone is submitting a conditional use application, really where the cost difference comes in is the $35 per acre fee, sign fee. Just again to reiterate, I know we just talked about signs at our last meeting, $5 per sign. So again, an example would be if it's 20 acres, the application fee would be $1,530. 40 acres, $2,230. So just kind of an example of the cost discrepancy there, what the application would look like if it's 20 versus 40. Next slide, please. City versus county regulations. I wanted to go ahead, and this is not like incredibly comprehensive, but it is also a really good example of kind of the differences of the main points that we're addressing in these unified zoning code changes. Minimum lot area, again, for city, not really applicable here. County, 20 acres is what this group has proposed. Setbacks per the zoning district. Here we are talking about setbacks being 400 feet, 600 feet. The rest, mostly similar. I'll go into noise a little bit more in detail on the next couple slides. I know we were discussing 65 decibels at our last meeting. And then the noise ordinance, I will go into in further detail on the next slide for the city side. Screening, there are certain requirements, and here is that here. Notwithstanding provisions in section 4B, screening shall be provided only if determined to be necessary by either the planning commission or the governing body. So again, screening for these event centers in the county would be at your discretion. I just wanted to reiterate that. Next slide, please.
So Justin, real quick, can we go back 2 slides, type in? So on this one, the question to come up is what's being discussed about for the county, this draft, is it more restrictive than what the city has in place? Is that the question
Correct.
that we received?
Yes.
Okay, and so what's the summary that
Sure. So the summary, the big difference between these are that really it comes down to not necessarily noise, because the city has its own noise ordinance, but really what it comes down to is the setbacks and minimum lot area. Those are the 2 main points that we're kind of addressing through this, is that the county has the 20-acre limitation, and then the setbacks, again, that's per the zoning district and the county. So when we'd be looking at that, we'd be looking at what that property is zoned as. And then really the screening. So that, we obviously on the county side has a bit more leeway when it comes to screening requirements, especially. Did I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Next slide, please. And we talked about screening requirements. Let's go to the next slide. Here's decibels. I know that this is the current noise ordinance for the city. I just wanted to go ahead and specify that.
Can you enlarge that font?
We might be able to zoom in just a little bit, but I kind of went over this at our next slide. That's perfect. So this is for, it's broken down into 2 different zones, I believe, in the city. This is for residential, commercial, from 8 a.m. to 10 o'clock p.m. 55 to 60 decibels for 55 being residential, 60 being commercial. Light industrial obviously has a higher decibel level at 70. Industrial, as this intensity increases, the decibel level is allowed to increase. This zone again is broken down from 8 o'clock a.m. to 10 o'clock p.m. And then I believe the next zone, perfect. This is for later into the night, 10 p.m. to 8 o'clock a.m. So you can see the distinction there is that you have to be quieter during the 10 o'clock to 8 o'clock a.m. hours, whereas the county, what we're proposing is a flat 65. So that's the difference there. Yeah. Thanks for zooming in.
Well, I mean, you'd think it would be, noise is noise, right? You'd think that it'd be somewhat consistent.
Yeah, this is current city regulations. We're trying to keep it simple with city.
Right.
Again, I brought up before that noise was a big discussion that we had
Yeah, it
at the
is.
OCC level. And we wanted to get the individuals in the room that would actually be enforcing
Right,
noise.
yes.
And that's why we wanted to consult with the sheriff's office and say, hey, I know this is typically MABCD during the day, but when these parties are raging in the late night hours, that's ultimately going to fall to the sheriff's office. So we did seek input from the sheriff's office throughout this process. Yeah. He did attend that meeting and mentioned that he was comfortable with that 65 decibel limit.
But you can build an industrial place next door and they can run 80.
If they're in the city.
Well, I know.
Good luck on policing that.
Hey Siri, let me hear 65 decibels.
Pretty quiet.
That's the same thing we said.
It's in my hearing aid.
So decibels, again, state of practice, this was addressed briefly in the rural venues APA document. Riley County was specifically singled out in this document. They also have a 65 decibel or greater at the property line enforcement level. But other than that, the guy did have a lot of suggestion on that, but did specifically highlight Riley County as being a county that does enforce that. Next slide, please.
Sure they do.
Draft review and update process. Next slide, please. This is where we currently are. I know we've discussed this issue a few times at the advanced plans level. If it were to be recommended for approval today, it would go to the MAPC and then would again require approval from the Board of County Commissioners and the Wichita City Council. So we would likely take this to the Board of County Commissioners staff meeting prior to their formal approval to get feedback from new committee members.
There's not many event centers in the city that are 20 acres, are there?
No.
That's what happened in the city.
No, I know, but I'm saying, if you're looking at restrictive, county's certainly more restrictive
Absolutely.
from a size standpoint.
Because
From a
it's a
size
less populated area.
Yeah, from a size standpoint.
And some,
Does that make sense? If I can have one in the city with like an acre?
yes, and I'll tell you why. So in the city, you're most commonly going to be talking about a structure where people are doing it inside. In the county, you're more likely to have events that take place also outside as well as indoors. The other thing that we see in the county is that, and you've had some cases that were like this, you start to get below that 20-acre threshold and you start to see them not occurring out in farmland areas and agricultural areas, but rather requests starting to come in rural subdivisions. And that is where we see a lot of issue. And we had that with that case down near Hayesville, where the photographer wanted to turn into kind of start doing events down there. You remember the input feedback we got on that. So that seems to be where most of the rub is.
So if you have an event center in the county, is it grandfathered in? Because eventually, then subdivisions just, you can forget it then.
Well, if you've got an existing one, then, and it's less than that 20 acres, yes, you'd be grandfathered in as a non-conforming use then.
So then you could subdivide the property and.
No, you'd face the restriction that you couldn't do anything to significantly modify it. That like you can't have the permission now and then reduce your property size. I think that would put you in violation of it, and you'd lose your nonconformity. But I'll look to JR to
First blush.
A good example of that would be like Everly Farms.
Yeah.
They used to be good size operation down there, and then they sold off around there, and they still have their event center there. So how would that affect them?
in that case, they would be grandfathered in. And we'd have to look at the particular case, but it depends on what if they've got they could have land holdings where the event center is actually for a smaller piece of property than their entire holdings. That would create a difference to me in terms of can they subdivide those other portions. I don't want to see them subdivide portions where they've gotten the permission to do the event center, because I think that's going the opposite direction of what we're hearing the concerns are about, which is noise, lights, that kind of stuff, which is happening from proximity.
So Scott, though, we're not grandfathering in the allowance for noise though, right?
Because it's in this section of the zoning code, I think you would be.
Yes.
I think you would be, because all these conditions are new and those are operating under the old.
Oh,
It is-
wow.
Yes.
And only for this one use, because we're still hearing that the sense is that the county doesn't have an appetite to adopt a county-wide noise ordinance. If they did that, then there'd be no grandfathering.
Because I know there's an event center that's on just a few acres down on South Hoover that consistently has issues with really loud outdoor noise. So this isn't gonna, any of those that do that, this is not gonna, it's not gonna impact them. They'll be able to continue just doing what they're doing.
There are also some that are operating. There's one in particular that is operating. We suspect illegally, and they've had multiple events, and that's turning into a larger kind of enforcement issue.
Right.
So we also have the rogue ones that are out there
What? Rogue ones?
In the county?
in the county.
I can't believe anybody does anything that's rogue.
I have a question to ask. In your definition, I probably heard it wrong. You were limited to one event a week under one classification, or more than that as a different classification?
I think it was, we would have to probably go back.
The definition, I
Yeah,
think it's simply Commissioner McKay trying to get to, it's not an open every day of the week establishment, and there's one entity that doesn't use it constantly, that it's used by various people over time. I don't think that's not necessarily a limitation that you can only use it once a week. It's just part of the definition of being a lead.
I thought when we were talking, we went through this definition kind of fast. General was under a certain classification, the other was under the fact that if you didn't operate more than once a week. But if it, it's not a problem, I just thought it sort of, also I had something that was asked for me when we was talking about this. Just sitting down drinking coffee.
Yeah.
What's a gun club classified as? Is this
what was that?
a gun club? And how does this?
Maybe outdoor recreation.
Probably generally the outdoor recreation and entertainment under the zoning code. I suppose if they had a nice structure like the one in Butler County, Murphy and Sons, they had a structure and they started renting it out for people to have events that would then become an event center. But just the gun club itself, I think, is outdoor rec and entertainment.
127th Harry is in a city. If this would have been in effect at that point in time, they had a huge horse barn, but they also had a gun club there. Shot clay pigeons, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that would fall under the classification.
Yeah.
Not by itself.
And what was the decimal?
Loud. As long as I'm talking, there's something else that probably ought to be considered. So we reduced the size to 20 acres. We increased the setback to 400 feet. So if we have a square 20 acres, it's roughly 900 by 900. 400 feet gives some developable area. However, we're not going to find square 20s.
No.
Commissioner Nix, no. Standard 20, 660 by 1320. With a 400-foot setback, a standard 20 will not allow any construction at a 400-foot setback.
Yeah,
And if that's the intent, that's fine. I just wanted to put that out there that
Wow.
lengthwise would, of course, but widthwise, you're gonna get 800 on a 660.
So
So
my question was, is there a process for a variance on the setbacks that are, it's outside of Sedgwick County, but in Cali County, a business they built with an event center, had a creek running through it, so they put all the parking between the building and the creek. So the
Yeah.
parking was in flood area. That left a spot where the building is only about 120 foot back from the road. And so could you come in and do requesting a variance on situations like that?
So the way it's currently drafted, the setbacks are under one of the provisions that cannot be waived by the governing body. Now, that can be changed, but currently it's drafted, the answer is no. The 20 acres, they can't waive, the 400 foot, 600 foot, if that passes, they cannot waive it.
So how
I
can we build?
suppose, however, they could come to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for a true variance to the code, because it's a code requirement.
How can you ever build anything then? Can't. I mean,
Well,
why do we need to talk about it?
this might be a really good time to chime in a little bit on this. We have new county commissioners that are coming in, to serve our community. There has been a lot of push, if you will, to have those new county commissioners sit down and review this and have an opportunity to chime in on it and get their feedback and all that. So I think that, we can go on and on and on here, but I do think this might be the the time to look at deferring this indefinitely in order to give the new commission, if you will, an opportunity to sit down and chime in and have their feedback. And Scott, I'd like you to chime in on this too a little bit.
No, I think that's a good point because we're trying to be responsive to the needs of the public and that being expressed by the county commission. With the election and the change, those needs and perspectives might change.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that even if they don't, but you still have new commissioners who maybe have not had the experience with this too. So giving them an opportunity to have some time to figure if this is an issue that they want to continue with or a subject they wish to investigate further, I think giving them the time to do that would be very beneficial.
Well, because what we're doing, we're looking at changing the unified zoning code and the comprehensive plan, and that's pretty important stuff.
In terms of a deferral, we've had some discussions at the staff level about those, just in terms of not for this item, but just in general about how to do that. And I think the preference is for a time or a date certain. Is that right? I wonder perhaps in order to achieve kind of giving some more breathing room, maybe it could be something that would be pushed out till like March or maybe later, whatever you're comfortable
I'd say
with.
6 months.
Give it
Well,
some time.
Going back to legal, we don't know what the itinerary is going to be for the new county commission. So how can we put a date restrictive on it when it may not fall in their plans, if you will? And 6 months ought to be.
We
You
can't
know,
get it.
You're saying rather than a date certain, say for 6 months, or within the next 6 months, or whatever it's done.
6 months,
And what happens if the county doesn't do that within 6 months?
then we have to
Then we
defer.
can just defer it again. Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess the question I would have is, if it does get deferred for 6 months and they wish to bring it up before that, is there a way or a
Not to exceed.
mechanism?
Well, just make the motion up to 6 months, so that way there it can fall anytime in there before, couldn't it?
I think if we defer it for 6 months and we need to defer it again, then we obviously could. And if we want to go ahead and schedule something beforehand, I think the department has the discretion to add it to an agenda and say that it's at the request of the county commissioners or the whatever governing body makes the
Yeah,
request.
because the sole purpose is going to allow the new commission to sit down and
Right.
do what they do.
So they make the determination. The county, in other words, whenever they decide, because we've all heard it, I guess, except for whoever they're gonna appoint.
Well, I think at that point, what I'm hearing is that for the advanced plans agenda, we put together a draft. Ultimately, we look to the chair to make sure that we've got the right items on there. I think that would give you the discretion then to add it if you saw a need to add it before then. We would do our announcements similar to the way that we do it for any of these agendas. We distribute it via email, we post it on the website.
Also, I do think there's very strong possibility that there may be a workshop involved with the county commission and either the planning commission or members of the planning commission. So having said all that,
So how is this any different than anything else? I mean, we have new county commissioners, they need time to come up to speed and figure out where they are. I mean, how is this one item any different than any other item?
I think because.
I mean, do we just have a
controversial.
6 month
we don't,
moratorium
not
on
just
anything?
that, but the fact that it is going to be making a change to the zoning code and also the comprehensive plan. And like Commissioner Johnson just said, it is pretty controversial as far as they just want to make sure that they are dotting all the i's and crossing the t's and stuff. Because there's other things that are involved in this besides, just whether it's setbacks or proper zoning. You got, tax issues where how's it going to affect, hotel, motel, bed taxes and all that, which is getting out of our bailiwick a little bit. So, but, and really it's the same thing for the next item that's going to be coming up too. Same concerns are on that, but without jumping ahead, I think that we're at a point right now that I'd like to see this defer to up to 6 months, if that's acceptable to legal.
If I could, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the calendar. We've got one drafted next
Okay.
door for 2025.
That's right.
Is it on the wall?
No, this is the 2024, Scott's grabbing one.
This one goes out to March, so if we go out 6, I need to grab some more, so I'll be right back.
Got a magic marker, just make it 5.
Yeah. Change it up a little bit.
Close enough.
Yeah.
I have another question. I mean, the same question as 20-acre deal. We're always having concerns in the city with noise, with these outdoor patios for bars and restaurants. And we're handling those on a lot smaller site than 20 acres. I just don't understand your logic on that.
On the size?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying, we're having cases all the time about bars and restaurants moving out onto the patio for entertainment on a site that may be at 2 acres or an acre.
We do,
So
and
how do we justify making this so much more restrictive in the county? Making them have 20 acres.
I think one consideration there is that in the city, there is the noise ordinance that's in effect. So,
Well, we're gonna put a noise requirement on this.
true, there would be a noise requirement on this.
The county is much wider open than the city. The sound's going to travel more in the city. The sound probably will travel nowhere near as far. It's just not counting the basin. Of course, the low end of the frequency spectrum travels many miles, but it's much more congested. There's much more noise already in the city. I mean, at certain times of the year in the county, might be noisy. Might be a lot of farming going on. Other times of the year, all you have is the wind.
For the cows.
I think that was part of the rationale for the larger lot areas.
Jared, to me, it seems a little bit odd in that we're impacting so few people in the county compared to the number of people in the city. I mean, I know the squeaky wheel
That would be true.
gets all that attention, but you're a quarter mile away and you're upset because the neighbors are having a party. And so you call and then it's recorded as a complaint rather than just driving down the road like you used to.
A good
Say,
neighbor
shut it
joint
down.
party.
I mean,
Who's never been invited would be invited. Someone just be invited and bring some with them.
I think I'll go back to Joe's comments though, because that's why I'm glad that you all are here, because you're really wrestling with the details. Could you have this updated to just have that 65 decibels at the boundary of the property? Absolutely, you could. I think then that gets to the issue though of the enforcement, which Mr. McKay had brought up earlier. And we had come up with the setbacks prior, we'd introduced that as part of this prior to the noise decibel coming up, because the noise decibel conversation came up during a BOCC staff meeting when we presented this information. The idea, though, behind the setbacks, the concept is to get the noise generation and activity further away from neighboring properties. But you're right, you could do that just based on noise, or it also includes hours of limitations. You could do it just based on the noise and or hours of limitations.
I'm concerned. Let's just assume that was our property. And we had a creek that ran down through the middle. And no way we could build on the creek. So how do we get a 400-foot setback if we have to move it to one side of the creek?
You have to move the creek, Joe.
That actually would be a very good candidate for a variance. And the reason why is because in that instance, it's just the simple nature of the configuration of your property that makes it so unique from other properties that you should be exempted from having to follow that portion of the zoning code.
Because the vegetation that follows that creek probably is a better buffer than this.
On one side at least. Okay, I mean,
What
I
day?
think there's a.
Yeah. So if we go out to June, then it looks like it'd be June 12th.
You can do it before that, though. That'd be the drop dead date, the 12th.
The 12th would be, obviously that's June, so 6 months out. But, well, I mean, if you want to go to May 8th,
The chairman could put it on the agenda earlier.
No, I said they can do that, but that's what she said. So it doesn't necessarily have to go to that date. That's the drop dead date. It has to be done by, or get an extension.
that would be when we would staff would automatically put it on the agenda, and because as a group, unless you take other action, it would have to be on that agenda.
Okay. All right. I think what we need to do then is go ahead and defer this for 6 months into June 12th, 2025 meeting.
I'd make that motion.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. I'm gonna ask for a 5-minute break. Sure. I know, if I want to take this little pill, I won't do it either.
You just left it.
Okay, we're gonna re-adjourn the meeting.
Jared, I haven't heard that word. Readjourn.
That's opposite of adjourning. We're gonna reconvene.
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 That too. Yeah, our next agenda item is regarding short-term rentals. Agenda item number 5, and the request on that is making changes in the Unified Zoning Code. And move it to the full body of APC for consideration. Justin, you're on.
Good morning again, everybody. Justin Constantino with the Planning Department. You may recall, go to the next slide, please. I'll discuss the purpose in just a moment. You may recall that we discussed this item last at our October Advanced Plans Committee meeting. This item was tabled. It was brought back to the agenda for further discussion today. The purpose of our discussion is for me to provide you with information, answer any questions that you all might have on this topic, and then ultimately, again, make a recommendation to the full planning commission. Next slide, please. We'll discuss the issue at hand. Background, I'll provide some definitions about what short-term rentals are. I would go through our existing regulations, discuss possible new regulations that you see in front of you today, and the draft review and update process. Next slide, please. So again, what is the issue? Next slide. In most situations currently, it's not legal to operate a short-term rental in the unincorporated county. So the existing Unified Zoning Code says that no stays are allowed under 7 days. So I think where this is coming from is that the Board of County Commissioners knows that there are potential operations, short-term rental operations existing in the county, and it's not currently legal to operate those short-term rentals. So they're looking for a way to address them. Next slide, please. Nationwide and globally, obviously there's many communities that are kind of working to identify the right fit. At the moment, it's kind of a hot topic. The Unified Zoning Code, we did have some adopted changes to short-term rentals, specifically regarding the city in September of 2023. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with that. We touched upon it briefly on the previous item. Next slide. Background. Next slide, please. Back in November of 2023, the BOCC held a staff meeting and received a staff presentation on short-term rentals in the unincorporated county, general overview of what it currently looks like. Again, back in November of 23, staff presented a research memo to this group to discuss the state of the practice. Again, very similar to the presentation that we provided to the BOCC in November 23. December 23, the Sedgwick County Board of County Commissioners adopted amendments that were previously adopted by the city of Wichita to the Unified Zoning Code regarding short-term rentals in the city. So on the city side of the house, we had adopted the administrative permit process. We began addressing a licensing process for the short-term rentals in the city, but nothing on the county side. Next slide, please. In September of this year, the BOCC held a staff meeting and received a presentation regarding updated findings and possible changes to the Unified Zoning Code. That's what we're here to talk about today. We again met with them in October. They reviewed the changes that we had provided and gave us additional thoughts and feedback. And then in October of 2024, this is the first time that the Advanced Plans Committee, this body, has heard this particular topic. We discussed this, we went through a presentation, and it was at that time that this group decided to table that item. Next slide, please. Definitions, short-term rental in the city. This is defined in the Unified Zoning Code. As I mentioned before, there is no short-term rental in the county because it's not technically legal, but the city definition means the use of a residential dwelling unit or structure to provide rooms for temporary lodging or lodging and meals for transient guests on a paid basis. The residential dwelling unit or structure may be owner or manager occupied. It does include bed and breakfast. Next slide. Short-term rental. This is kind of some examples of what we're talking about here. When you think short-term rental, think Airbnb, think Vrbo. FlipKey is another example. Next slide, please. These are the type of structures that we're looking at, just to get your brain kind of wrapped around the discussion. Next slide, please. Possible regulations. Next slide. This is what is currently in front of you today. This is what we're discussing. As I mentioned before, there's currently no definition in there. So the first possible regulation would be to actually add a definition of what a short-term rental in the county is. We would note that a short-term rental in the county will always require an administrative permit for conditional use, and that administrative permit for conditional use shall be valid for 5 years. Essentially, it must be renewed for every 5 years. Next slide, please. Permitted only in residential dwelling units and permitted accessory apartments. So no Airstreams or mobile homes or anything like that. They may be permitted as either a primary use or an accessory use. And again, as I mentioned before, not permitted in any recreational vehicle or Airstreams or anything like that. Next slide, please. An owner, operator, or property manager must be designated for the short-term rental in the county. So these are the responsibilities of the owner or operator. They must live within 30 miles of the short-term rental in the county. They must be generally available 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, and they must post their contact information in a conspicuous location within that dwelling unit. Next slide, please. No gathering of more than 20 adults for the purposes of this subsection. An adult is any person over 12 years of age. Note, above 20 adults, they can apply for a conditional use. Any short-term rental in the county is subject to inspection by the zoning administrator or designee, building official or designee, and by both. Next slide, please. The use of the short-term rental in the county is limited to activities that are incidental, customary, accessory to a residential dwelling unit as determined by the zoning administrator. Weekly residential trash service must be provided, and it must be in compliance with all applicable zoning, building, fire, and life safety codes. Again, just to reiterate, these are all of the possible changes that we are recommending in a unified zoning code. Next slide, please. Possible administrative process. So this is what it would look like if somebody were to submit a short-term rental application in the county. They would submit their application. Notification letters to the abutting and contiguous properties would go out, very similar to our previous or our current short-term rental process. 14-day protest period. If more than 50% of those owners abutting and contiguous say, we don't like this, or we have an issue with this, we want to discuss it further, then it would become a denial, and it would be submitted for a conditional use application. So that would be the current process. Next slide, please, or the proposed process. Here's an example. This may look familiar, very similar to what we showed previously. Next slide, please. Here's an example of what it would look like in the county. You wanted to show a realistic look at what it would look like if the property in yellow here was submitting a short-term rental application in the county. All properties in blue would be notified. Next slide, please. Here's kind of another example. Good one, because this big rectangular property on the west side there, that would also receive a notification, but all properties in blue would receive a notification. Next slide, please. And here's kind of a funky example, but anything essentially touching or contiguous to this subject property will receive a notification, including that one there. Next slide, please. The folks that would receive that notification are all property owners, so it would go to the mailing address of the property owner, not necessarily the tenant. Next slide, please. Monitoring service. This is from, I believe, the database that we use for short-term rentals in the city. So the question is, should we utilize this monitoring service for short-term rentals in the county? Likely, it would be a complaints-based. We would get a phone call and determine whether or not this is currently operating. And then again, a 5-year cycle of applications and related application fees. Next slide, please. Feedback. Next slide. This is feedback that I believe we received mostly from the Fourth County Commissioners. There's a pretty significant need on their side of the house for a need to act. I think that there has been a number of calls and requests regarding this topic. That is why the Board of County Commissioners tasked the Planning Department to come up with a solution to this item. There were some questions about taxation and fairness. Again, taxation regarding whether or not these are taxed as hotels versus residences. And then again, questions about business registration. Should these short-term rentals be required to register as a business? Those were all questions that came up at the BOCC level. Next slide, please. Draft review and update process. Next slide. We are currently here. I know that you had all heard this issue again back in October. We wanted to go ahead and bring it back on the agenda. Any approval would be from the MAPC based on the recommendation of the Advanced Plans Committee. And then again, we kind of wanted to slot in that Board of County Commissioners staff meeting prior to formal approval by the VOCC and the Wichita City Council. That's what the approval process would look like. Next slide, please. Recommended action. I know we discussed this at length, and we discussed it prior, but the recommended action would be to review these draft changes to the UZC and recommend approval to the full Planning Commission. So are there any questions?
Commissioner Warren. The regulations in place for the city of Wichita, these regulations will go for the county. What happens to other incorporated cities in the county if they don't have any rules and regulations, they still Wild West?
That would be under their jurisdiction, yes.
Yeah, this doesn't apply to Derby or Mulvane.
No.
Okay.
Good question.
So I know I have to always ask the off the wall questions because I'm curious. So you said the Airstreams that they wouldn't fall underneath that. I'm assuming that if somebody wanted to set up a place with yurts, tree houses, something like that, that would fall under RV park.
Hey, JR, how you doing?
I'm just testing you, JR.
I saw a show somebody lived in a yurt.
I think it becomes a question of whether or not it's a dwelling unit.
Probably, actually, she's right. It probably would be more, I mean, those are basically more like tents with some structure. Probably technically become.
They are, but the tree houses, I just ask because I do road trips all over this country and I see a lot of unique places for people to stay. And so I'm always curious if somebody came and wanted to build something like that in Wichita or in the county.
Well,
A tree house.
hang on. Before you answer, let's look at the definition real quick. It says short-term rental in the county means use of a residential dwelling unit or structure to provide rooms for temporary lodging or lodging and meals for transient guests on a paying basis in an incorporated county.
Right, so a tree house, I suppose if somebody wanted occupancy in a tree house, they'd have to go through the permitting process and they have to be built to the building code. In fact, at the time, you got one.
It took they had a lot of issues with permits and inspections.
I can imagine.
I do believe he's gotten it there where it's now a dwelling, and he does want to use it as an Airbnb.
So far in the city so we have one down to about 430 now. It's a number that has declined since our.
Does that include the homeless encampments? Or they fall?
No, they don't have to have permits.
There's not been one that's been anything other than just
Okay.
true dwelling units.
So on one of these exotic trips, did you actually stay in one?
I've stayed in a yurt. I haven't stayed in a tree house yet. It's on my list of
Climb a
things.
tree to get in the tree. If she does this, I want to.
Oh, you gotta watch the Tree Master show and see those tree houses.
We're talking about you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Kansas. You wind up in the land of Oz when the wind comes through. Well, where we're at on this one too is really the same as what we were on the previous agenda item for the event centers. You know, again, we have the new county commission coming in, and it is their intention to be able to give the opportunity for the new county commissioners to review this also and chime in on it, make their recommendations. So what I'm going to request again is a deferment for 6 months. We can make it for June the 12th, 2025, to give the new county commissioners an opportunity to review and chime in.
I'm going to take an opposite approach on this one. I'm not sure that this is as controversial as the last one. That if the commissioners don't feel comfortable with what we've got, if they haven't got that, they could put a deferral on or send it back to us and let them do that. This is, I think, one of those areas that's pretty straightforward and laid out. I mean, there's lots of ways we can go in terms of how strict it is, but I think that this has been through the mill enough times that I think we've got something that we can present to them. And like I said, if they're not comfortable with they want more time to look at it, they can send it back to us and say, hey, I've got concerns about how we're going to enforce it, or I've got concerns about what kind of fees ought to be involved, or what the process is. They can give us specific things, but I'd like to send it on to them.
Well, again, what the concern was is to give the new commissioners an opportunity who haven't even seen this yet, to have time to review it and go over it. You know, 'cause I know they have a lot of issues when it comes to the taxation aspect of it and stuff. But it's up to the will of this board that you all prefer.
I don't see any harm in 6 months from now, or that's me.
Is that a motion?
No, I just don't know how fast it needs to be moved along. There's problems, reason why it's ever, it's just,
That'll get it off, so I'll move that we take a recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there a substitute motion? Hearing none, we will vote on the motion to recommend approval. To the Unified Zoning Code, move it to the full body MAPC. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign? No.
does it have a grandfather clause in this? It's a document.
Similar to.
5-1.
Yeah.
And I believe Aldrich.
Who?
We'll make sure we got the vote.
Yeah, 5-1 with Aldrich opposed. I have that down. And then the question was whether or not the existing short-term rentals are grandfathered. Is that?
Well, there's some of these existing in the county now, or would be a problem brought up, or
Well,
Also-
Illegal, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the zoning
They're
code,
all illegal.
yeah,
yes, thank you, they're actually hotels and motels.
Ooh.
So they would be illegal unless properly zoned. If they're renting them out for more than 7 days in the county, then they're not short-term rentals, they're just straight rentals. So the answer, the ones that are out there are probably just illegal, so no, there's no grandfather.
What happened in the city of Wichita, not that it's a perfect analog, but if the county chooses to go that direction, this is a way they could do it, is in the city of Wichita, there were a number of them that were operating in violation of the zoning code. When the city put these regulations in place, they provided a window of 12 months or 6 months, depending on what type of short-term rental it was or what was needed, for them to go ahead and get all the appropriate licensing and everything in place. In this case, it would just be a zoning
Right.
issue.
We don't have that in the zoning, so.
Yeah.
So they'd be, the ones that are illegal would continue to be illegal until we can.
And we would look to the county for instruction, for guidance on enforcement as well. We have seen that in the past sometimes, where if people are proactively working to resolve the zoning issue, that enforcement will pause the enforcement while they're working through that process. So the county may have that opportunity.
so if I've got a family farm and I've taken the old house and we've made it into a B&B, whatever you want to call it, and I've been doing it now for 10 years, and all of a sudden I'm illegal.
No, you were already illegal.
You already were illegal.
No, you weren't, because you were doing your rules.
Just need to convert to agritourism,
They actually are, they're hotels and motels.
go through that process.
But if we had reached out to you and said, hey, either we've received a complaint, because at this point, the counties, when we've talked about doing a monitoring service, we don't know that it's worthwhile in the county, unincorporated county at this point. So if we receive a complaint about the Airbnb and we investigate and we find out, and I'm saying we as in staff, and because it's MABCD who does the enforcement, and then if we verify that, yes, that's what's happening, and then we send a letter to say, hey, this is, it appears that you're in violation, You have a certain window of time, typically 30 days, to start corrective action. And if we don't receive that, then we'll proceed with the enforcement. So there's multiple steps along the way, and it takes a complaint to trigger enforcement actions.
Okay, well, we have a couple of receive and file items on the agenda. Next will be agenda item number 6 regarding Collinsville neighborhood plan. Just please, sir.
Yeah, just a quick update on the Collegeville neighborhood plan. Again, as you mentioned, it is a receive and file item. As you all know, we are currently working with Collegeville stakeholders to develop a plan for the Collegeville neighborhood. The plan will serve as a guide for future policies, programs, and infrastructure. We are working with a 15-member steering committee that is appointed back in November of 2023 by the City Council. We've hosted a kickoff meeting, individual focus group meetings for businesses, communities, schools, churches, nonprofits, and we have released a public online survey. We've got a lot of great feedback from that online survey. We'll be hosting our 12th steering committee meeting in person next Tuesday, December 17th, from 5 o'clock p.m. to 7 o'clock p.m. in the planning offices here at 271 West 3rd Street. We will be discussing future land uses in the neighborhood. So the plan is humming right along, and we will have some additional information for you in the next advanced plans committee meeting. Any questions regarding the Collegeville neighborhood plan? All right, wonderful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Our next agenda item will be item number 7, update for the MAPD.
Yeah.
This is also received file.
And I won't take too much time on this. You've all got handouts included as part of your packet. We've got almost the end of the year statistics. So we'll highlight those real briefly. When it comes to non-subdivision cases, we finished up at 221, which puts us in the top 3 for the last, going back to 2018. When we look at the number of times that an MAPC meeting, our workload was above what staff could do. We came out this year at about 9, which is better than where we were last year with 16 meetings. And what we do is we look at what's the capacity of current plans to handle the caseload. And that's how we kind of come up with that statistic. So being at 9 is really good news compared to last year. On the page 3, there's a graph that shows, of course, the bumpiness in terms of applications coming in and going. This meeting today is really a test of staff, and I thank staff so much because of the work that they've put in to process these applications. I think there's like 18 items on the agenda for this afternoon, so it could be a robust meeting for you, and we're prepared to order pizza if it goes too late. So
Let's get them. Let's order about 4 o'clock.
about 4 o'clock.
Robust, huh?
We'll talk more about that after the meeting's done. Subdivision items, bumpy as well. We actually ended up on page 4 with a lower number than what we had last year. We were at 65, which puts us actually is like the second lowest since we've been measuring since 2018. However, on the next page, same thing we've been saying all year is that the number of lots that have been created this year has been significantly higher than what we saw last year and the year before. So although we're having fewer plating cases come through, the ones that are coming through have more lots.
Would you attribute that to duplexes and stuff?
Residential development, residential subdivisions is what will push up those numbers. Yep. And when it comes to staffing, which starts on page 6, we are working on getting staffed up. So the admin division is now fully staffed, and we have Ashley, who's joined us here today. So she just started on Monday, so it's been a fast week. Glad you're here. So that makes our admin staff fully staffed up. Current plans, we have a vacant associate planner position. For advanced plans, with Mary's retirement, we have a vacant senior planner position. We've also got a associate planner position that's vacant, and we're doing interviews for the associate planner position tomorrow. So very excited about that. And the zoning enforcement is kind of our rock and staying steady down there at 100% filled. Short-term rentals in the city, we're in enforcement right now. We've sent out letters to those who have just not been enthusiastic about compliance or not working to get in compliance, and we're working through that. I think court action, if it happens, will happen probably sometime in the first part of 2025.
So it's process.
Yeah. Solar, we took the regulations that the county had adopted, the changes to the zoning code, we took those to the city. There's internal discussions within the city about what's the best fit for the city. So I expect that we'll see some changes to that. We've drafted up some versions of that. We're waiting to see what more feedback we receive on that one. Public notifications, we went to the city council workshop in November and got some feedback on that. We'll be updating those and then bringing those to you for review as well. Event centers in the county, we talked about those. College Hill Neighborhood Plan, we talked about that. Parking and zoning, we got the contract
Just about right.
to the applicant. Now we need to get it to the city manager's office for signature. So working on that. And then daycares and zoning, you saw that one. So this is a small amount of what we're doing, just some small highlights. We've got a number of other things. These are the big ones.
And no surprises on the contract.
Oh, with the parking? No. In fact, what we did is they shortened it up, and then we asked for I want contracts to be formulated payments based on deliverables, not on effort. So we went back to them and got those.
If there's nothing further on the updates, we'll move to public comments. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak or have any issues, concerns, complaints?
We're all from the public.
So you have 3 minutes. If not, we'll bypass that one. Okay, other business, is there any additional business that needs to come? I do have one quick question. Have we finalized the bylaws for the planning commission and also BZA?
Currently getting signatures right now. It's over at the Sedgwick County office at the Ruffin Building, getting signatures now.
So that's wherever they decide to put their X on there then.
Yes.
When we get those back, and they'll be fully executed because they'll have all the signatures. We'll scan it, put it on the website, and we'll send out an email to you all so that you all know that it's posted on there and effective.
Okay, and then the commissioners, if they request it, we can also request a printed copy.
Absolutely, you betcha.
Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for January the 9th, 2025 at 10 a.m. If there's no other business, we will adjourn.
Go back to that good picture of the woods with Bob. I like that.
Wait, where? What?
Where'd he go?
There's a picture. Oh,
Right there. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, that is.
This one.
Who picked that out?
I don't know.
Mary probably picked it out.
Oh,
We didn't make it wintry yet. I was
No, I like that.
I was expecting Bob to be in the
I
picture.
know.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, yeah, see him down there.
Also, spelling of my name is not correct.
All this.
That's your spot. Yeah, you can leave your stuff at